I really think increasingly there may only be two roles and kind of maybe a third. The two roles that I'm sure are durable are engineer and seller. So an engineer builds a scalable system to solve a problem or achieve a goal, and a seller, converts interest in the market into customer relationships by, building trust, navigating people's buying processes, demonstrating how the product can solve people's problems. What I think you have to do in AI is just index way harder on trying to find those builders. So you're like, asking people how they've solved problems, you're giving them problems and looking at how they solve them. And the ones whose inclination is towards building the system to solve the problem is what you want, because they're the ones who you would think are going to be able to repeatedly build and deploy and manage agents to do more and more work.
That's Steve Hind with his central thesis of how to build an AI native company. You need more builders. Maybe even only builders and sellers. Because AI agents change what operations work is. Instead of doing the work, you're instead defining packages of it, handing them to AI agents, and getting them to do it. So operations becomes building. These are not recommendations coming from some idle commentator. Steve is a builder too, primarily of Lorikeet, Australia and maybe the world's best customer support tool. With over 100 million Australian dollars raised and rapidly expanding with offices in the US and the UK. He was also product lead at Stripe and Watershed. So if you too are looking to build an AI native company, I would study the next 45 minutes carefully. Maybe even dial back your podcast speed from 2x to 0.75. It turns out that a man who's won the World Universities Debating Championship, studied at Harvard Business School, and worked at BCG thinks and talks quickly. Or, if you'd like your company to become AI native but don't have the mind of Steve Hind, please let me introduce myself. I'm Alistair Bell, and when I'm not talking to AI native companies on this podcast, I'm helping others become one as a fractional head of AI. My LinkedIn is down in the show notes, so if you connect with me and mention the podcast, I'll send you a document with a summary of all the insights from not only Steve, but every podcast guest so far. Okay, let's get started. Here's Steve Hind on AI native speakers. Hi, Steve. Welcome to AI Native Speakers.
Alistair, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. Well, let's get stuck straight in. So I realized on my previous podcast that being a AI native company doesn't come naturally from just being an AI company. So I thought I'd start off by asking you about how AI native you feel that Lorikeet is, and feel free to define what that means as well before getting going.
Yeah, well, maybe just a bit of context is, we are an AI application layer company that sells an AI product, but we've been doing that since, 2024, early 2024, when the applications of AI internally were just much narrower and less capable than they are today. So we were not necessarily born in a completely AI native world. We've sort of moved into it and tried to move into it. AI native, in my mind, is the idea that you look at problems as opportunities to define and hand off work to agents, and you view the amount that one person can get done or supervise as effectively unbounded, because it's not bounded by the hours they have in the day. It's bounded by their ability to define packages of work, hand them off to AI agents, and have the agents do the work on their behalf. Against that kind of ambitious definition, we try very hard to be AI native. I can see plenty of places where I think we could do more of it, but we certainly have seen, very substantial growth in our business over the course of 2026 and virtually no headcount change, because the sort of efficiency increase or the output increase per person has been so strong that we haven't felt the sort of normal need you would feel at our stage to just continue to stack on headcount.
Amazing. No, I love that. I love the way of measuring it economically as well, of seeing the increase in productivity you've had. I think that's a really defensible way of looking at it. I mean, have there been any challenges along the way of getting people using AI more? Because it wasn't necessarily what they signed up for.
Tons of challenges. There are two main species I'll talk about, and you should tell me if you want to double click on both or either. The first species was, on the engineering side, at the beginning of this year, as sort of coding agent capabilities really took off, there was a painful adjustment period where like the literal, hour by hour task mix of engineers changed really rapidly because there was no longer a need to write code by hand, and much less of the system was about manually verifying and testing, and it was much more about the meta engineering of figuring out how to build a system that was capable of self-verification and testing. That was largely temporary because I think most engineers, once they got over the enormous shock of that kind of changing overnight, realized that like we've always been climbing up the abstraction ladder in engineering, and this is a new rung on that ladder, and it's actually just as, if not more, exciting from an engineering perspective, but there was definitely an adjustment. The second species of challenge is coding agents and associated tools have been a huge unlock for non-technical people who want to build and automate and have previously been unable to. But at the same time, the tension is that engineering is not actually the knowledge of code and code syntax. It is a way of thinking about building systems to solve problems. People without a grounding in that engineering mindset can get themselves into a position with AI where it enables them to build a lot of stuff. But then as every engineer learns, the build is at most 5 to 10% of the work, and the maintenance and iteration is the other 90. And so you have people sort of getting themselves into very quickly a position of kind of drowning in tools that don't quite work, that they're not really sure how to advance. And so, it's not been a silver bullet on the non-engineering side either.
Got it. Two very different paths, the engineering side and the non-tech side. Would you say one's been easier or harder than the other?
Yeah, the engineering side ultimately is easier. The scale of adjustment was enormous. Like, as I said, the way people are spending their time day to day just radically changed. But the conceptual frame of the job to be done was the same. Engineers, regardless of the tool chain, their job has been to understand a problem and to build a system to solve that problem at scale. Coding agents have let them climb the abstraction ladder, as I mentioned, but the job is the same. If I now go to a RevOps person and I say, up until 6 months ago, your job was to define and run a set of operational processes that make our go-to-market organization efficient and effective, they would understand that, and that's largely what the job has been. In the last 6 months, the job has actually become to build systems that scalably do this with software. So there's sort of been this leap where what you need out of a lot of people on the non-engineering side is engineering mindset and approaches, even if they don't necessarily need to know how to code. And that is a much bigger conceptual jump. And for some people, it's very, very hard through no fault of their own. For people who maybe have always had that mindset, but lack the literal knowing how to code, it's a huge unlock. But there's more people in that first bucket of they don't have the engineering mindset yet than in the second bucket.
Got it. So for engineering, it's more like a new tool, whereas for non-tech teams, it's a completely new mindset. For some people, it might be one that they adapt to very naturally, whereas others, it's new and unfamiliar and maybe they can't do it. How do you adjust there? You've got a team who some people it's coming very naturally to, some people it isn't. The work is changing at the same time. How have you organizationally coped with that, where the nature of work is changing very quickly?
So look, we're still figuring it out. I would not advertise us as like the finished product or the final answer. I guess a few things we've played around with. Having a period of sort of letting 1,000 flowers bloom and encouraging everyone to do high amounts of experimentation is good. What you find out in teams over time, though, is that's not that effective. Like, you are probably better off having a minority of people building and pushing tools out for everyone to use than to have everyone building, overlapping, not quite interlocking, not quite harmonious sets of tools. The second part of that then is like figuring out how you attack problems in change management. One thing I've said internally quite a bit is I now believe it is easier to change agents than people. And to give an example of what I mean by that, one thing that's important to our operating cadence is people sharing, effective asynchronous updates on their work. The way that I would have solved that problem, when I was at Stripe, I wrote a document that was quite popular internally called Go/Good Updates. And it was just a one-pager on, the fundamental tension of writing updates is that you know about the work, but leadership cares about the outcome. So a good update talks about the outcome and substantiates it with the work. And here's some guidance. And so the way that you did change management a few years ago was you tried to articulate what you needed from people. You would do a roadshow, or you'd write a document, or you'd talk at all hands, and you'd give people feedback, and you'd try all these ways to kind of embed and build this skill across the team. The way that we solve that now is we have a skill to produce updates that follows that guidance. And first we make that skill available to everyone. But like the path now is like, I will just have an agent write an update on a project, push it to the person as, hey, here's the update we think you need to send. You should edit it and send it. So you sort of invert how you do some of the change management with the team. That's not to say you don't want to invest in people upskilling. Like, absolutely you do. It's just that I actually think it's a faster process to like push them a good update and have them think about it and kind of send it on, rather than that kind of very lossy process of like lengthy change management to explain new skills to people.
Got it. So would you say that you want to have everyone changing systems, or are you suggesting that there are some people who
No,
are primarily kind of owners of the skills and the systems?
yeah, I think we've pulled back from this a bit. I think one way in which things will change a little is I would expect most operational teams to have someone on their team primarily charged with systems and automation, and then to have the remaining people on the team, doing work aided by those systems and automation with, greater efficiency and effectiveness. And obviously they're going to have like feedback and input, but their job is going to be to do things that can't be automated almost by construction, and then a smaller portion of people to go and automate skills. So to give you an example of how we tackle that in our sales team, we've sort of had our go-to-market engineering function building out a lot of tooling to help our sales team do effective outreach. Now, we believe a lot of the last mile of effective outreach does require human judgment and intelligence. And so that tooling is sort of teeing up, right company, right person, right message, right time for a human who owns that territory to think about and say, how do I want to go and orchestrate this? And so I think that's the pattern that you'll see, as opposed to say, every sales rep builds their own agent to do prospecting, or traditionally, which is you give people some very thin tools and then you tell them to largely go and do it themselves. And maybe you use operational processes like checklists to see if they've done it.
Yeah. And in that example in GTM, is that someone who's a member of the GTM team who has gone off and shown aptitude at building skills, or have you brought someone in from an enablement team? Like, how's that worked out?
We've iterated a little bit on this, and the answer is like a bit of a combination of the above. So for a period, we had, kind of an ex-Bain BizOps person working on this, and there's a lot of value they were able to add. More recently, we've pulled in like technical intern style profile. So knows very little about the domain, but has engineering skills, maybe not the level of skills and experience in engineering that we would hire them on our like R&D engineering team. But we found that like people who can bring a builder mindset and be paired with subject matter experts can move extremely fast. And in some ways that can be a faster process than trying to backfit a lot of engineering thinking into people who have the business acumen. I'd rather kind of pair the people with the business acumen with a builder so the two of them can go faster, rather than try and turn the business person into an engineer if they're not, immediately kind of picking it up.
Got it. Yeah, because you want to hire them for that part of the role they need to do. They've got to be really good at that. And then the systems might not be part of it. So pairing makes a whole lot of sense. Do you then have to have that person who you're pairing part of a different org, or are they reporting into tech? Like, how are you then making sure? Because, if you've got one person building agents in one way and another person building agents in another way, that could cause problems.
Yes. This is a thing I've been looking at quite a bit. Having infrastructure and blessed patterns for building agents, I think, is a central pursuit. Again, my general tendency is, I think, in situations of sort of uncertainty, it's good to encourage divergence and sort of organic finding. But after some period, you're going to be like, okay, we roughly understand the contour of our options to build and deploy agents. And we know there's a combination of pros and cons to each. And now we're going to like narrow the path again into the set of options that are like on the Pareto frontier. So, we don't want to invest in options that we know to be just like strictly inferior than other options we could be taking. But it doesn't mean we have to always standardize down on one tool. It just means we have to have that, after that period of divergence, a bit of like critical assessment and convergence. And the other reason to do that is at all the layers of the chain, you want as much of the time people spend to be focused on the unique element of their task and not anything generic to the task. So, if 80% of the effort of building a cloud agent is figuring out like the hosting and memory infrastructure, that's like a really bad idea. You should have one person figuring out hosting and energy and memory infrastructure, and then the other people just putting the particular business job to be done, into that infrastructure and deploying it.
Got it. Which I think is a nice transition onto the knowledge layer. So I think now is a good time to kind of move on to that, because you just spoke about needing to have that for various different agents. In previous podcasts, I found that people have built their own ones of these. And that's also something that I'm aware that you've had some success of doing at Lorikeet with connecting it for Lorikeet. So I was wondering if you could let me know where you've ended up on your kind of knowledge layer for agents.
Well, as a starting point, I think the thing that you would typically observe with new waves of technology is that early on, the early adopting companies tend to build rather than buy, purely because early on there is not an obvious vendor, or maybe there is no vendor at all that does what those companies need. And the companies are technologically adept enough because they're kind of early adopting tech forward companies that they can build their own solution. Usually that's a very unstable equilibrium, and things kind of standardize and you end up getting vendorization, because we are not building agent memory infrastructure for our internal purposes joyfully. It frustrates me a lot that we need to build it. I would like to write someone a check and buy it from them. We just haven't quite got the right thing yet. What we have tended to do is be very careful to make sure that memory belongs in surfaces that we can have a lot of control over. So we want a lot of business process definition to live in effectively markdown files that we can sync in with GitHub. We think that's like a pretty durable piece of info that's going to be portable between different runtimes. And then we do tend to use Notion a lot as, a wiki and a memory tool, and sometimes as a database. Again, that feels like pretty open and pretty portable. What I have tried to avoid, where I think there starts to be risk, is, for instance, Claude Code makes it very easy to build what they call cloud routines, where you define a whole bunch of business logic and Claude runs that business logic for you in the cloud. That seems exceptionally dangerous, because that business logic is just living in a bucket defined by Anthropic, separate from your source control, separate from any ability to easily extract it, separate from any collaboration features or governance features. So anytime you start going down a path like that, where it feels like you're doing something very proprietary, I'm like, oh, that's what I want to avoid. When I sort of describe the core set of things we need, I can easily see over time some sort of, open source possible option, or, it's a proprietary platform, but information can flow in and out freely, will sort of be the place that people end up going.
So what are you pumping into your knowledge layer then, and what is that enabling you to do as a result of getting all that data into one ontology?
So, we're still leveraging HubSpot as our kind of sales system of record. So a ton of stuff going in there. What I'm trying to do with Notion is have a lot of agents that are sort of appending to logs of information that then allow us to do, extraction and synthesis like on demand as needed. So to give an example, traditionally in product marketing, you would build out battle cards, for your major competitors that your sales team could refer to. And they would be a synthesis of everything you know about that competitor and sort of how you win against them and how you position against them. I think what those always required was sort of predicting what the most relevant pieces would be so that you could synthesize them. The better approach, I believe now, is to have agents collecting information on your competition from various sources, writing them to just a log, and then letting agents at runtime kind of turn that into, a bespoke battle card fit for purpose. So that's a long way of saying a lot of our focus is on like digesting information into discoverable buckets and then letting agents go and discover it at the right time.
Awesome. And how have you found opportunities like that for AI internally? What's been your way of discovering them?
My kind of mantra with the team, which is maybe a little counterintuitive, is I actually don't particularly care about people finding ways to automate their current job. The reason being, if you have 10 people and they each use AI to automate their job, you have saved 10 people worth of output that you can go and redeploy. If instead you say to people, find the things that are valuable, but that you are not currently able to do, and find a way for AI to do them, then the amount of incremental output that one person can produce becomes unbounded. So if I'm, the one product marketing manager, and because there's 10 people's worth of work to do, there's a huge number of opportunities I just can't prioritize that I know to be valuable. If I can get AI agents to take on those opportunities, then I might be able to have 5 people's impact. So instead of automating one job, I might be able to automate 5 jobs. And so that's why I'm much less focused on go automate what you're currently doing. And I try and get people to focus on what do you believe would be valuable that you are not currently getting the chance to get to? And how do you get agents to go focus on that? And so that kind of battle card building or competitive intelligence building is an example. Every SaaS company I've been at has never been as good at that as they want to be, but it's very valuable. And so we just have agents work on it.
I love that. You can automate up to one role, but if you look at all the work that you potentially could be doing, it's unlimited.
And this is something that is more true in a high growth environment. Like one of the defining characteristics, I think, of a high growth environment is each person in the org probably has 10x the available work than the time they have in the day. Maybe in a more mature setting, there aren't such obvious opportunities that are high ROI to go into, but certainly in a high growth environment, they are.
So what work have you been finding that your team haven't had time for and they've automated? What's been the best?
Yeah, a lot in and around kind of sales enablement and intelligence. Some examples of agents. We have an agent that goes through all of our sales correspondence and sales meetings and just finds objections that customers have raised and looks at adding them to kind of our injection log, keeping a list of top objections up to date with best responses. So, including like, here's some footage of Nate on the US team doing a really good job of answering this objection. That's a hugely valuable resource for a variety of reasons and not very commonly used. You can do a lot of kind of collecting, targeted moments. Often what a team will do when they're looking for feedback on a feature is have a couple of conversations with a couple of people and effectively get this like second or third hand recapitulation of what those people happen to remember. But having an agent crawl through transcripts, you can actually say, hey, we reviewed every sales conversation in the last 6 weeks for mentions of this problem area, and we found out it was coming up often. One of the tips actually that has been useful for me is I've looked at things that, me or my team has done in previous roles that have turned out to be incredibly valuable, but have been so high effort as to not be sustainable. So, I remember my previous role, a product manager on my team had this great breakthrough where we had thought that there was a certain feature that would have a lot of demand, and the sales team was saying, no, it's never come up on calls. She sat over a weekend and watched every sales recording for a month. And it turned out it was coming up on like 40% of calls. And because sales didn't understand it, they were just not mentally logging it. And so that's the sort of thing that she can do that kind of weekend heroics and it drives a breakthrough and it drives a great new feature. But realistically, she's not going to do it every weekend. Well, with AI, you can. I remember sitting down why customers were contacting us about a particular problem. And I sat and just read, all 700 of these contacts that had been lodged in the last whatever period it was. And I hand categorized them. And I came back on Monday and said, hey, did we realize like 40% of these contacts are just about this one thing? And like we're shipping a feature to solve it. Again, like I'm not going to do that every weekend realistically as product manager, but like I can totally get an agent to go do that for me on demand. So looking for those things that are like valuable, but high effort such that like, in the bad old days, if someone were to do it once, you would be like, wow, that was like, that person really grinded to get to an answer. Well, like now we have kind of grinding as a service.
I love that. One of my heuristics up to now has been, what if I had 50 people who could do this? What would I get them to do? But I might replace that now with, what if I had a really dedicated sales manager? What would they do on the weekend? Because, it uncovers those amazing things that you can automate and kind of get those great results. Are there any things that you've tried and just haven't worked out, and maybe AI isn't quite there yet on being able to get done?
AI, it's two things. Maybe it's a longer list than this, but just two that come to mind at the moment. AI has still not nailed interpersonal work communication to my satisfaction. I have found a lot of its writing when it is trying to advance a case relies on a lot of like rhetorical flourish that is actively unhelpful in a work environment. Like, we're all adults here. We're not trying to like persuade each other. What we're trying to do is like put forward recommendations backed up by facts and then, challenge and debate those and come to a conclusion. And the use of rhetorical devices just like actively undermines that. Like, I don't need to see in writing, like, and this is the crux. I'm like, just lay out the facts and the recommendation. And that's true for a few types of kind of interpersonal communication. The other is I, in various ways, and our leadership team in various ways, use AI to kind of search for and raise potential problems for action. And it is pretty good at doing a wide search and spotting things, but it has this very like Pollyanna-ish tendency to be like a bit overly dramatic about things. So it doesn't have good executive judgment about like what is a crisis. So, it can go and scan and come back with like, 10 potential crises of the day, but like only one of them is actually a crisis and most of them are kind of fine. And some of that is is it lacking context, but some of it is just that the models are a little bit like dramatic. They have this, how they like to lean in and role play. So if you tell them like your job is to survey, to find like fires the leadership team should be aware of, then like everything's a fire because they like to kind of, emotionally mirror you. And I find that very frustrating because I think the way that you want to operate is actually like very dispassionate and low drama. And so having this like these agents running around and being dramatic is a little bit frustrating. But those are the two that most come to mind.
So your main frustration with AI is it's just too in your face, too much drama when trying to get things done. If it could just tone it down a notch.
It's too extra. Yeah, it has the energy of, the energy of maybe like a very junior chief of staff as opposed to the energy of sort of a senior leader.
Yeah. I still don't understand why AI can't write. It's all it does, and yet it can do incredibly smart things, solve maths problems, but fundamentally is a terrible writer.
Well, I kind of think about what are the reinforcement loops that the agent gets. So math, it can reinforcement loop against truth. Code, it can reinforcement loop against huge amounts of online material and the kind of validity of the code as measured by, tests and compilation. I think in text, it reinforcement loops against just the input of people. And I think like most people are shitty writers and shitty thinkers in many cases. And so it's probably been given some like pretty bad reinforcement. Like I would really like to pay for an LLM that is reinforced on just Amazon PRFAQ documents or something, like, just reinforced on its writing on like really good kind of clear, factual, high information density business writing, and then just like take out all the other slop.
I have seen a model that was post-trained on literature only before 1850, and it was wonderful.
I've seen that too. Yeah, yeah. But that's what tells you, I think, that a lot of it is to do with some of these reinforcement and post-training choices.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna try and bring that in next agent I make. And tools. I've seen that you guys are at Lorikeet running, not only you've got everyone on Claude Code, but also you have started a program where you're teaching people how to get teams on Claude Code. So I suppose I was just, wondering, should all companies train non-engineering teams on Claude Code?
Like generally, but like it's hard for me to generalize because, sorry, I say generally and then it's hard for me to generalize. It's hard for me to generalize because I don't know the contours of every other company. But I would say this, coding agents like Claude Code and Codex have, I think, significantly greater ability to get valuable work done than the sort of non-technical wrappers like the Claude version is Cowork. I don't know what the OpenAI version is called, but I found those like non-technical wrapper versions are just like significantly worse than just the raw terminal. They're also more powerful and more dangerous, which is why I think maybe, different orgs would choose a different point. But certainly for us, like the space to like dent the car is greater, but like the space for really high output is massively bigger. And so I would kind of put the more powerful tools in people's hands. And then actually, those more powerful tools also have more powerful and customizable configs. So if you have some central governance, I think you could probably have the best of both worlds. But I think in general, we have to not be afraid of putting more technical tools in the hands of traditionally non-technical people. The world is changing rapidly. The capability, the ability for people to learn about new concepts on demand via AI is greater than it's ever been. So like, I think people can deal with learning some new tools. A ton of people at Lorikeet in January had no idea what the terminal was on their computer. They'd never opened it. They've never used it. But in addition to the terminal being the portal into Claude Code, they can also ask, what is a terminal? What is this command I'm being asked to run? What is Git? Back when I was learning a lot of these concepts, it was like Stack Overflow or bugging an engineer. And the capacity to learn now is just like so much better. And so therefore, I think we should, be willing to believe in people a bit more and and put more powerful tools in their hands.
Yeah. I like that. They're way more powerful. There's also more space to dent the car as well. There's kind of both sides, and you kind of got to take the rough with the smooth. You can give people the best possible tool, but also, they could potentially
and maybe just to put a finer point on that, right? In the operations world, process non-compliance is largely a training or a diligence problem. If you have given the person the 5 steps they need to do to update HubSpot and they didn't update them correctly, either you didn't train them on it or they were being lazy and non-compliant. When you instead view that as an engineering problem with coding agents, like if it is possible for someone in your sales team to accidentally delete, the CEO's daily planning skill, which has happened, that is a system problem. That's not about that person's training or compliance. It is, if there's an outcome our system is producing that we don't want to be producible, we need to re-engineer our system so that it's not possible. And so the other benefit of kind of embracing this more engineering way of thinking that coding agents and AI drives is like a better way to think about some of these traditional problems.
How are that course you're running to get people on Claude Code? How long is it taking you to kind of transform the way your team members operate from the old tools they were on through to this new set of tools and infrastructures and ways of working?
So it really varies across the team. The speed to get the first 30% of people on board, exceptionally fast. The speed to get from 30 to 80, also quite fast. The speed for the last 20% can take quite a long time. My guidance generally has been you actually want to focus on about the 30th to 40th percentile of adoption, because by the time you've got, a plurality of your team in the new world, you can be fairly confident a good chunk are going to follow, reasonably quickly. And then there will always be a rump at the end for good reasons or bad reasons who are not kind of crossing the chasm. And expending a lot of calories on trying to make that happen is probably not that worth it. Like I sort of view the way to approach AI is not really to mandate using it, but it is to really increase your expectations. And then AI becomes a very natural way to meet those increased expectations. But if for some reason someone is still making very valuable contributions, without leveraging the tools as much as they otherwise could, then look, it's an opportunity for them. Like you can go to them and be like, hey, the fact that you're keeping up and not using AI probably suggests you could be even further ahead if you did, but like you don't really need to go and dictate. And then, if people are not kind of keeping up to the expectations, then again, you're not going to go like separate someone from the company because they don't use AI. It's going to be because, they're not delivering the amount of impact that you need from them.
Got it. I think now's a good time to come back into roles. I saw in a post you did a while ago, you talked about the AI role collapse, where there's this great unbundling of the jobs that people do and rebuilding, and people are able to do more than they previously have. So you've been an AI company throughout, but things have changed in the ability to do work. So how have roles and the organization changed due to AI?
So again, this is such a moving feast. I don't know that it's fully settled. A couple of observations. One is it has massively expanded what people can do, but I'm not sure that because they can do it, they should do it. And I give you two examples of that. It has enabled our sales team to do huge amounts of enablement and technical planning and execution for themselves. But is that the optimal sales process? Actually, it turns out you want a forward deployed engineer or a solution architect involved in a deal for reasons other than whether the salesperson can do it. You actually want to think about how it creates opportunities to multi-thread, how it conveys, the depth of your engagement with a customer, the way it enables people to kind of focus on what they have a comparative advantage in, even if they can both do the work. So the can and should kind of divide becomes pretty important. Then I think the other thing it's emphasized is, I really think increasingly there may only be two roles and kind of maybe a third. The two roles that I'm sure are durable are engineer and seller. So an engineer builds a scalable system to solve a problem or achieve a goal, and a seller, converts interest in the market into customer relationships by, building trust, navigating people's buying processes, demonstrating how the product can solve people's problems. The potential third role, where I'm not sure engineers can build everything that's needed to support a product and support sellers, is what I would just call an owner, which is a person who takes accountability for some business outcome that might span domains and either by themselves or with others makes that outcome happen. So I think if that framework is right, that would mean that a lot of kind of operational style functions are not a thing in the future. They're really just going to be owners who work with engineers to build and deploy the systems that are needed, or they will just be kind of engineers building those systems.
The three role organization, the engineer, the seller, and the owner. I really like that. I suppose the engineering and the sellers would be kind of vertical, and the owner would go across the other way. And then that's your...
Yeah, I think the other part is like engineering will increasingly be a part of a lot of other functions is the way of thinking about it. So if you say, okay, I want to define a finance function from first principles, how much of that would be engineering? I think quite a bit would be engineering. And then, what is the residual? Is it a person who is effectively like the owner of financial governance? And their job is to, pull in expertise and have engineers encode it into systems, as opposed to kind of hiring out teams that go and do a lot of operational processes.
Cool. And in terms of bringing people into the organization, so hiring, yeah, I mean, how does this change what you're looking for and how you test for it?
Also moving feast. The thing that I have tried to put a lot more weight on as we are hiring now is evidence of building and learning. I've kind of observed in my career before AI that you often see people, with roughly equal sort of, CVs or skills or intelligence breaking into builders and operators. Operators fundamentally ask, how do I define and execute a process with increasing efficiency, with adaptations to changing business context? And builders sort of ask, how do I build and deploy a system to do a class of work? And interestingly, I've seen owners and builders sit in the same job and the same job function and then just approach that job completely differently. An example of that would be you might see someone in a sort of accounts receivable role who gets a really tight spreadsheet template to manage the billing of every customer. And you might see someone in the same role trying to figure out how to write Excel macros to automate the billing of each customer. What I think you have to do in AI is just index way harder on trying to find those builders. So you're like, asking people how they've solved problems, you're giving them problems and looking at how they solve them. And the ones whose inclination is towards building the system to solve the problem is what you want, because they're the ones who you would think are going to be able to repeatedly build and deploy and manage agents to do more and more work.
Really interesting. So the axis is swimming towards builders because they can have a huge impact on their work. How would you test for that now? Is the way that you interview people different because of AI? I mean, it's harder to test fairly. Like, how are you seeing if someone's a builder or not?
We don't rely very heavily on interviews. We have always done all of our hiring through work trials. So we interview pre-work trial to assess someone's kind of, motivation, drive, reasons for being interested in the role. And then we let the work trial carry a lot of the skill assessment. And so, yeah, you give someone a problem. How should we approach X? And you see how they approach it. If what they write down is like, we're going to have a meeting every Tuesday where we run through, a template, that's probably not where things are today. And the best people instead are going to build some system and then think really thoughtfully about where they inject humans and where they inject kind of bottlenecks with humans.
Great. Yeah, it takes you back to the Uber value of just let builders build, let them build, see what they build, see how they get on. Cool. And for the final question, you've complained online about the quality of sci-fi now with AI and how people are going into some kind of dystopian doom loop. I get the sense that you have a slightly more optimistic view on it, although we'll find out now. You're looking 10 years in the future. How do you see work adapting given the rapid change in what we can do with AI?
Yeah, look, a point that Tyler Cowen has made is that the portion of a person's life they spend in kind of paid employment has already dropped dramatically in the last 2 centuries. People used to leave formal education very young and work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day in the fields until they became physically incapacitated in old age, and then sort of do domestic work until they died. And now most people do 12 years of school education, a further, 3 to 6 plus years of higher education. Then they go and work in a professional field and sort of retire, 30 to 40 years later and enjoy quite a number of years then after retirement because life expectancies have increased. So no one views that as like, the industrial and agricultural revolutions destroyed work and now no one has any more work. Actually, our incomes are through the roof. Our income per hour worked is through the roof by even more. So if you think about what I would expect AI to do as it rolls out across the economy, I think we probably will work less, but that doesn't mean that in your prime working years, you'll work fewer hours. It might mean everyone spends more time developing unique skills and insights early in their career. They may work even more intensively during the key parts of their career, generating huge amounts of value and wealth. And then they may have longer in their career where they're doing less work or less economically productive work, pursuing interests like art or philanthropy. You can imagine that happening. And that would be consistent with this constituting a sort of substantial increase in productivity. There are definitely risks to the technology if used poorly, for sure. But I just think there is so much opportunity for things to be so much better than they are that I think, the beauty of capitalism is it will largely steer people towards finding those opportunities and exploiting them. And I'm quite optimistic that, it's going to leave us in a better and happier place.
Perfect. That's a really, really nice way to end. Thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.